It can be a scary time to be a teacher right now. There are lots of voices shouting into the education space, and there is no question that part of the goal is to intimidate teachers out of talking about real history and the challenging questions that come from studying it. And it's not subject specific. Though history and social studies are a favorite target, subjects ranging from art to drama to science to mathematics to social emotional learning are all being attacked as well. Lots of teachers say they get into education to make a difference, because they believe in the importance of an educated population, because they have faith that their students can help make things better. But how can you educate students about things you're either explicitly or implicitly told you can't say? This isn't hypothetical. This is happening in schools this past year. Teachers threatened with losing their jobs for discussing their own identities, with others pressured to change their curriculum to avoid sensitive books or topics. I am fortunate to have taught in independent schools where my curriculum wasn't dictated by an outside body. Though I know my example won't be applicable for everyone, I hope it might be helpful for some to at least hear about the process. One of my first teaching jobs was as a teaching assistant with second graders. Each class had a weekly hour of library time. Usually this was overseen by the librarian, but my master teacher asked me whether I'd like to teach the class. I jumped at the chance. The first half of the year was straightforward. We did lots of genre and author studies, and I enjoyed getting to use my child actor talents for funny and expressive voices. And then January rolled around, and I was thinking about how to talk to 7-year-olds about Martin Luther King and the civil rights struggle. My school was overwhelmingly white and Asian. There were no black students in the class, possibly the entire grade. I remembered that the year before I had been with the same group when their teacher had read a short story book about Rosa Parks. At the end of the story, all the kids pointed to the one dark-skinned child with Indian parents and said, "It's sad they wouldn't have let him on the bus." I knew they needed more context, and I needed to have this not be a one-off. And so, for the next 5 weeks, every Monday before lunch, my 7-year-olds and I would talk about social justice. Every week I brought in a new storybook. We would set up 2 pieces of chart paper, and we would learn about another moment in American history, breaking down a story's elements into some sort of injustice and then identifying strategies the characters used to fight it. We started with slavery and Harriet Tubman. Then we did Japanese internment. Then Jim Crow and Rosa Parks. Then Cesar Chavez and farm workers. And finally, the Holocaust. Yes, I taught the Holocaust to second graders, and I'm proud of it. Only after all of this did I finally read them a story about Martin Luther King. They were still just 7-year-olds, but at least now they had context. For me, this class was a huge insight into the question of what information can kids handle, and the answer was quite a bit if it's taught well. For me, it really came down to a few key elements. Trust. These kids and their parents had known me for over a year. They saw me every day. They came home singing my praises. I didn't have to worry about families questioning my motives. Scaffolding. Because I knew my students so well and we had spent the first part of the year establishing trust and norms for library time, when we switched focuses in the spring, there was more buy-in from students. Since I was working with young kids, having some basic structure was important. We didn't have a whiteboard in the library, so I taped chart paper to the wall. After every story, we would discuss what had happened and identify what injustices we had seen and then compare them with what beliefs and actions the activists had taken to work towards change. The repetition of the procedure each week helped prime students so they knew what they were looking for as I was reading. Research. I'm not trained as a historian, so I tried to be very thoughtful about which books I used with my students, both in terms of age appropriateness and accuracy. To teach the Holocaust, I spent over a week looking at book lists until settling on one that centered children as its focus and which seemed direct enough without being overwhelming for their age level. Empathy and vulnerability. I left the Holocaust for one of our last books because it was personally sensitive to me. My ancestors were all Eastern European Jews, and in decades of family research I've documented over 200 murdered cousins. That morning I spoke very slowly and deliberately to my students. I talked about why this was so personal to me, and I also reminded them of something critical: that none of them were responsible for things they hadn't done. Some of them had mentioned to me that they had ancestors who were German or Italian or Japanese, and it was very important that they all understood that no matter where their families came from, the only Nazis were the actual Nazis. Then I read them a story about an educator named Janusz Korczak and the orphanage he ran for Jewish children in Warsaw, and how he, along with 200 of them, were marched to a train car and taken to the Treblinka death camp. I cried at the end. The students quietly clapped. Communication. That night, I wrote a debrief home to the families. I had been doing one each week, recapping what we read and talked about. But this was the first time I had parent thank you notes in my inbox the next morning. At the end of the year, I had more. That was nice, but what I really wanted to know was whether any of what we had learned had stayed with my students. For at least one, the answer turned out to be a striking yes. That summer, he was in an airport with his family when he saw religious Sikhs being randomly detained for extra security. His parents were blown away when he started shouting, "Hey, that's injustice!" He was still 7. It's scary to be a teacher right now. It can be easy to feel overwhelmed or intimidated or trapped. And it's natural to worry about potentially teaching this stuff wrong, especially since so many were never taught it themselves to begin with. I'm under no illusions that my little class can be replicated everywhere, or that it will be welcomed everywhere. I know that I was both lucky and privileged as a straight white man working in an independent school, having the freedom to teach whatever I liked with no one looking over my shoulder. Still, I'd like to think there's value in this story. The experience showed me that young children are more empathetic and can handle a lot more than adults often give them credit for. And that gives me hope.